Africa is experiencing an epidemic of monetized and commercialized elective politics, which is a threat multiplier of democratic backsliding. Unregulated money in elections is further raising the stakes and turning electoral races into violent political battles in many African countries. When money becomes the main motivator for political socialization and determinant of electoral outcomes, it defeats the democratic principle of elections, reflecting the will of the people as they become a reflection of the power of money. Unfortunately, the legal and institutional framework for campaign financing in most African countries is either very weak or non-existent. In Kenya, Nigeria, Madagascar, and Tanzania, progressive laws have been enacted. The issue is reluctance to implement them. Additionally, there is lack of a vibrant continental coalition of citizen observers advocating for transparency in political financing. Alliance for Finance Monitoring (ACFIM) has brought together like-minded organizations from across the continent in response to the threat posed by monetization and commercialization of elective politics.
The theme for this panel is citizen disinterest in how political parties and candidates source for their money. This is the final panel. It's been a long day, a long 2 days since where we started in delivering this international conference on money and politics in Africa under the theme Campaign Finance Transparency. Over the last panels, the last 5 panels, one of the things that has stood out is the fact that the legislators will not be interested in ensuring that they legislate on campaign finance because they do not want to legislate themselves in power, out of power. The governments, the sitting regimes seem to be thriving and using money as one of the factors to entrench themselves in power. The political parties seem to be happy with the status quo. And so that leaves us with the one stakeholder who is the citizen, because the academia have also not been able to address the subject of money in politics, because the subject of money in politics, particularly campaign financing, remains one of the most under-researched. It is as under-researched as it is under-legislated, but also as it is under, the interest to do so is not there. And so we have, in the last 5 panels, it has become apparent that our final result is going to be the citizens. And so, but these citizens do not seem to have interest. And so with me to interrogate this interesting subject that seems to be crowning it all, the subject of understanding why citizens are disinterested in how political parties and candidates source their money, because their interest largely is around bring the money, we eat it, regardless of whether it is dietary. They don't care to understand where the money has come from and how it is going to be paid back, and whether or not by accepting to eat it, they are conscripting themselves into the contract to pay it back. So with me to interrogate this subject are 4 distinguished panelists. To start with is the lady herself, Psetso Morapendi. Psetso is the current director of the Southern Africa Protect Whistleblowers in Africa organization. But she previously worked with the Botswana Center for Public Integrity as the co-founding director. She has spearheaded the establishment of the Southern African Anti-Corruption Network, one of the networks that we believe will help us to chase the thieves that are capturing the state in that part of the continent. And of course, the vision of that network is to advocate for a free, corruption-free and prosperous Sadaka region, a region that is infested by mafias. So it's a pleasure. Thank you for joining us. Good. Along with Setso is another distinguished African. His name is Israel Ilunde. Israel Ilunde is the co-founder and executive director of Youth Partnership Countrywide, YPC, one of the celebrated organizations that drive the agenda on governance and democracy in Tanzania. It works on civic and economic empowerment for the youth, and he's one of the men that we are looking at to champion citizen engagement works in Tanzania. Israel Lunde, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Henry.
And last but definitely not least, is the man himself. His name is Andrew Karamaji. Andrew Karamaji is a lawyer, a budding scholar, and a development practitioner with a footprint in Eastern and Southern Africa. Name any country in Eastern and Southern Africa, he's worked on it, especially including being having the uniqueness of working under two authoritarian regimes, of having lived under two authoritarian regimes in Uganda and Zimbabwe. His areas of interest are development work, international humanitarian law, constitutional law, human rights law, and public policy. He has co-authored in the International Journal Agenda and has contributed chapters in 2 book projects on civil society in Uganda. He works currently with the MS Training Center for Development Cooperation, MS in Arusha, as head of the Leadership and Governance Academy. And I should say, he's also a natural-born activist. Andrew Karamaji, welcome to the panel.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here with this distinguished core of people. Thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I want to start with you, Andrew Karamaji. We have been interrogating the notion of, and I am sure you're going to help me set the tone for this panel. Because you see, for the last, since yesterday, we have been trying to interrogate why the citizen is not stepping forward to occupy their role, their citizen agency role. Why a citizen is disinterested in matters of how their politics is being financed, and why are they being complicit in eating the money that has been sourced through that mechanisms that has been presented to them by politicians? And do these members even know that as citizens of their own respective countries, they have duties that they must fulfill as a matter of constitutional obligation? And do we even have anything that you can call citizens in Africa? So I need you to start by unpacking for us this concept of what we mean when we say citizens, and what and articulate it in the context of Africa. Andrew Karamaji, you have 5 minutes to do this.
Thank you so much. I have just come back from being an observer in the election in Zimbabwe, where I also
Andrew, excuse me, Andrew, if you can also activate your video, that would be appreciated if you can.
Sure. Part of my introduction is going to explain why I may not activate my video right now. So I just left Zimbabwe, where there's been something that was referred to as an election. And I'm in South Africa, where we have a serious power cuts as well, one of which happened while you were introducing me. You know, it's one of the major issues. So while I wait for the backup generators to my apartment to come on, I will maybe turn on my camera later, because I'm right now in a darkened location, even though my internet connection is able to stay on. So yes, I have the lights on now. I might try and do that. I hope you can see me now. But okay, great. So let me start here. And I hope that in having me first, I will be able to contribute meaningfully to setting the tone for the discussion. I will talk about three things, the conceptual questions. One is about the concept of the state. The second is the concept of the citizen. And finally, the concept of the of an election, which comes from the English word elect, which means to choose. But before that, I'd like to throw into the minds of our listeners, viewers, and participants. Why do we in Africa have so much reverence or respect or dignity for money that is collected in terms of condolences for a bereaved family? Why is it that such money cannot be tampered with, stolen, or in any way be misappropriated? Why is it that we in Africa have such reverence for tithe, money that is paid in houses of prayer, that is given in houses of prayer as one of the signs of worship for the different deities that we believe in? And I'll get back to that in my conclusion. So I am nearly convinced now, close to 100% convinced, that words and concepts like citizen, state, and election are misplaced, are imposed on us in this part of the world, and are distant. Because every time a newspaper headline anywhere across Africa says 100 million rand stolen or 10 billion Uganda shillings misappropriated, and so on and so forth, that kind of headline does not elicit any reaction, if at all. But a headline that says the king of this, group, or this religious leader, or someone has said this about this group of people, will elicit a serious reaction, because people feel attached to these entities, these cultural or religious entities, in a way that is tangible to them than they do this distant entity called the state. Our states were not, and this is a characteristic of many states, but our states were not formed through consensus or through dialogue. They were imposed. Their boundaries were delineated forcefully or arbitrarily. So someone just drew a line. Many parts on Uganda's map are merely straight lines. And so you find Luos in Kenya and Luos in Uganda, and you find the Haya in Tanzania and the Banyankore and the Baganda in Uganda. But essentially, these are the same ethnicities, and this is replicated across the African continent. So the first point I'm making is that the state is a distant entity. We only interact with it in terms of force when say we're required to pay taxes, or when we're interacting with the police. We don't have an organic interaction with this state. To the question of citizens, I would like to argue that most of us are inhabitants, residents, or people who live in a defined territory. The word citizen is too elevated, too serious a concept for it to be applied to many of our countries on this continent, because we don't have a sense of belonging, a sense of, we don't have a cultural identity that makes us a citizen of this, this or other state. If I mention the word to you, if I mention the word Japanese to you, something comes to your mind about who a Japanese person is and how they behave. If I mention a German, there are certain characteristics that come with being a German citizen or someone from Germany. If I mention Brazil, there's something we associate with, those people from Brazil. There might be stereotypes, there might be prejudices, but we attach something to them. The rhetoric question here is, what is it that defines Ugandans from Koboko to Kabale and from West Nile to Jinja? What common characteristics are there that define us, so that we have the ability to define ourselves as citizens, much less as a nation? If you agree with the two premises I have set, and I'm working towards a conclusion, that it is not proper to define ourselves as citizens, or much less that we live in this state called Uganda that we belong to, then it follows that something called elections, a process, an event, an engagement called elections, is not going to have a lot of meaning to these people that you have brought together to participate in this. There's fanfare, there's the whole electioneering, the campaigning, the messaging and whatnot. But as a certain scholar has been asking in my latest book that I'm reading, I have a habit. I try to read one book each month. And this book is titled, it has a provocative title, Why Don't the Poor Rise Up? Some of the scholars have argued that this idea of taking part in elections, first of all, do you have a voter? Is the voter sufficiently, not fully, sufficiently informed about the reason why they're taking part in this process? And if you ask that question, you'll find very interesting answers, even in the Ugandan or any other African context. So for me, having questioned those three, we need to come back to where I started from to understand what is it that connects Africans, Ugandans, Kenyans, South Africans, and so on, to the church, mosque, shrine, or what makes Africans respect money collected for a bereaved family, but the same African will not have as much reverence for a process like an election, or even think about themselves as a citizen. If Bafana South African national team, or Chipolopolo Zambian national team, or Uganda Cranes or Amavubi of Rwanda win a game at the international level, yes, all of us are, oh yes, we Rwandans, we South Africans, we Kenyans, we Ugandans have won a game, but that's as far as it goes. Our citizenship is not that well defined for us to participate in processes like elections in the way that they were intended to, at least not in that textbook sense. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think I made an omission. Thank you. There's a fourth panelist I did not mention. Let me introduce him now. The fourth panelist is Mr. Felix Kafuma. Felix Biane Kafuma is an anti-corruption activist, also an expert with over 12 years of professional experience in the domain of governance, with a focus on political accountability. He's a political finance expert, social researcher, and activist. He's currently working on Alliance with Alliance for Finance Monitoring, ACFIM, as a program director. He co-authored a publication titled Commercialized Politics and Captivity of State Institutions, and he's also very heavy on democracy. Felix Kafuma, welcome. Sorry for the omission.
Thank you so much, Henry. It's a pleasure to be part of this conversation.
Yeah, but as Andrew has shared, given us that grounding, I want now to go to the lady on the only lady on the panel, Setso. Yeah, in terms of why citizens seem to be disinterested in how the political parties they support source for their money, in how the candidates they vote for source for their money, they are only interested in having it and eating it. But also in view of what Andrew Kalamaji has articulated in terms of whether we have even something you can call a citizen or a voter. Bring us up to speed in the very context of Botswana. What explains the disinterest in the citizens only in matters concerning money in politics and public institutions, and yet the money that is for funerals and the other community affairs seems to be of interest, money in charge. So what explains this, and what is the context of Botswana? Over to you, Setso.
You guys want to get me into trouble. No, but ladies and gentlemen, good evening, and thank you for the invitation. I like the question that you've asked, Andrew, and I'd never actually asked myself that question, but now as you spoke, as you were speaking, I was like, wow, that's actually a good question to ponder on and to to reflect on. And as I was reflecting when you were concluding, I thought that I think the difference between the disinterest in a long process like democracy and elections, and the interest in church and say a bereavement, I think it is time. In that, in Botswana we call it matsidiso. With matsidiso, or the money to give, given to a family for support, is short term. After the funeral, we don't have to engage and talk about the dead person. At church, you can throw in your 100 pula or your $5 or your $1,000 and actually then feel good about yourself afterwards and pat yourself on the shoulder that, yeah, I've done this. I've given and I've sown a seed for those who sow seeds, and I've given my 10% or my 20%. I think because it is a short-term goal, it's a short-term vision, if one may call it that. And I think if we take it now to the process of democracy and the process of elections, most people don't want to deal with processes that do not have a clear vision of the outcome, especially in the African context where the opposition is in a perpetual state of wanting victory, and the ruling party is in the perpetual state of always knowing they will win. They're always sure of their victory. And therein actually maybe lies the challenge for young people or for citizens, because when you look at the clubs and the societies called political parties in our countries, they leave a lot to be desired for. I mean, a young person may ask themselves, if I joined a party, if I join a political party, what am I going to have to deal with? Am I going to be able to really bootlick? Is this something that I can do? Am I going to have to sleep with someone to be recommended to, for a position or a place or position of influence? Is it something that I'm going to have to do? Whilst with the funeral, we just have to go to the funeral, you pay the money, and there's no real engagement beyond the payment of tithing and offerings, except the understanding that you may go to heaven. But at least that is what we tell ourselves, that I will go to heaven. Whilst with political parties, the one thing that you are guaranteed of right now that we know of is only little hells that we encounter. Hence the disinterest, right? So it even goes beyond rationale. It's actually even more spiritual, I think, than we even give credit to how people engage with political parties at this present time. The failure to exhibit interest, even in asking for political party information, is because we see how the ruling party behaves in government. They refuse to share information. They lack transparency, they lack accountability, they do not take responsibility for any action or actions that they have taken that have actually put citizens in detrimental conditions. So that's what we're offering to citizens. Of course, there will be some disinterest because they're not sure. We are never sure of anything concrete when it comes to our political parties. So what we then end up doing, and I've called this a scavenger mode, we get into scavenger mode. If you cannot get anything from a political party, you are not going to then invest your time. If we take an example of a company, you would invest, they'll go on a campaign and sell 10 cents of a share, right? And then we buy our shares, and then whether the shares do good or not will determine our interest in that company. And how often we check our portfolio, how often we even talk about it and sell it. But our political parties, they leave a lot to be desired for that. You put in the money, and then what happens? They just go down. They don't share. If anything, there's a lot of deficits. There are no good dividends that you can get and talk about to other people. So the lack of interest is also created by the fact that no, we cannot talk good of our political parties because good does not exist in the leadership that we have. So when you have a company, you look at the return on investment that you've put in. Some of us who have been in political parties before, when I was at university, I don't know what the return on investment at this point that I can speak of, because without rubbing shoulders with the leadership or even with the executive committee in a particular way, leaves you on the outskirts of the circle of elite and the circle of influence. So what then is the return in there? Losing my soul just so I can get some form of a return? Most of political parties, in the case of Botswana, do not have paying members. They have members, but those members do not pay their membership fees or subscription fees to the party. So how are you going to ask about money of a purse in a purse that you do not contribute towards or contribute to? So the citizens also actually suffer guilt and shame for not upkeeping and maintaining their political parties, because for them, joining a party is just a matter of convenience for the person who has asked them to go vote in the primary elections. Most of the money that happens in that move in Botswana, actually during anything related to elections, is during primary elections. There's a lot of money that moves, and that money is never disclosed. And there's no law requiring any party in the country to actually disclose the money. So then you see, citizens see all of these things, and it is not funny. It's not interesting for them. So why must they waste their time being interested? That's what I can say for now.
Thank you, Setso. Thank you for those insights. I will now run to Tanzania, Israel Ilunde. We are talking about citizens not being interested in the matters to do with the politics, how their political parties are funded, how candidates are funded. And yet we are saying that in view of the challenge of highly monetized and commercialized politics that Africa is experiencing, but also in view of the need to make sure that we regulate money in our politics, we need to have citizens playing a role. What is it? What is the context of Tanzania? From where you sit and stand in Tanzania, what is that citizen like? Paint us a picture of the citizen in Tanzania and the kind of juxtapose that with what Andrew has just submitted, but also what Setso has just submitted. Israel, have your say.
Okay, thank you very much, Henry, my great friend. And thank you to my fellow speakers, and especially Karamagi and Madame Pusetso for the beginning of the nice words and recommendations. I think before I respond much, let me first of all thank you for the opportunity, but also say this topic is very important and timely. And I think when we talk of a citizen disinterest, it sounds like citizens are very impartial. They are passive in asking such questions. Of course, they lack interest, and they lack curiosity of why and how. Where do you get the money to come to us, especially when the money is involved with bribing or giving corruption and influencing people to go and vote for the person. And people are lacking concern about anything that is moving around. Yet we understand money is very important. There is no cheap election, and for sure no candidate can be sold or can be well known or even win the masses if there is no money put in to introduce him or her, but also to profile the issues for the election. But the question is, why do we see a lot of people not interested to ask key questions? And I think it goes beyond asking about money. It goes also in terms of asking public questions, policy issues, legal issues, and related public processes and issues. And I want to respond to at least 5 points here as I was looking. In 1995, when we made reintroduction of multi-party in Tanzania, there emerged a lot of opposition parties who contested. At that time, the state was very generous to all political parties. It made a grant and they were shopping money and become candidates. In doing so, they got candidates, even those who were not political party members. You are not a member in the morning, and the same day you become a candidate of a party, because parties were forced to make sure they have candidates so that they get money. And that money, unfortunately, was used more than it was expected. The money was expected to do campaigns, advertise and promote candidates and policies. Unfortunately, it went into hospitality, giving people food, drinks, t-shirts, and whatever you could name them. And that's where the question of corruption started raising, okay? But people are not asking, where do you get this money to give us all these things? In Tanzania, as a culture, we are used a guest who comes to your village. You as a resident or a host have to entertain the person. You make arrangements for food, where to reason, to sleep and what. But to the opposite, people who were coming from Dar es Salaam and the related cities, going to their original villages and constituencies, were able to do that as if they are the host in those villages, while they are actually the guests. So it was the opposite. That tells much that they were actually buying votes, bribing citizens, influencing for them to get their win or their victory. So one of the reasons why they are not interested, first of all, there is inadequate civic education, voter education, but also voter information, like Karamagi mentioned, was talking about it. So the civic education is education that makes people be able to participate in public processes. If you lack that, you may not see anything that you can ask. Not that you see, but you are not able to ask. You may not even interpret things, how they work and why they should happen. And the voter education in Tanzania need permission from the election management body, the Commission for Elections. If you want to do that, you must ask a permission. Sometimes they advertise, they say, those interested to give voter education, they can apply. And the problem is you apply in January, you get a permission close to the election, like close to October, maybe August or September. So what kind and how much education you can give to the people? So people remain that. And as I'm talking now, you want to deliver a civic education to people from political parties, you must apply through the registrar of political parties. If you are not granted a permission and you did not apply for at least 28, I think 30 days, which is a month, for example, you are not allowed to get that. It is important to make information is given so that people are interested to participate in public process, so they cannot ask any question in terms of money. Secondly, security. You may be free to ask a candidate a question which touches money, and the candidate start looking at you as you have you are trying to bring trouble to the person. So people fear about their security if they interrogate those kind of questions. and also associated with superstition. I got a story, one of the candidates at one place offered meals and had made a speech in one of the conference room. At the end of the time, people were told to receive some envelopes. And then they were told, take the envelope, but if you don't vote for me, just to be sure something will happen in your stomach or something. And then people were fearing now, but they got the envelopes and they said, okay, I will take, but I will not vote. When they went to the box, nobody was able to restrict it because they say, but after all, I'm alone. I can just vote. Nobody sees me. I'm voting, but I will tell people I didn't vote to the person. It happened that people did because of insecurity. Poverty and starvation. When people are in a situation of poverty, starvation, they don't make easy for their days to meet. When a politician, very powerful, comes with money, they are not ready to ask those questions. They make sure they get the money. They are happy on the electoral days. One of the political analysts in Tanzania called General Ulimwengu had written a book and said, during the electoral year, there's so much money in the streets, so much money. And you ask a question, in a country with a very minimal number of industries, a lot of people are unemployed, the money circulation not such. How is it possible that during the electoral year, there is so much money, yet people are not able to ask a question because they are happy. When they get small amount of money, life goes. But also, many people, I think Karamagi said, there is a problem that it's possible people are able to keep the church money for the burial ceremonies. It's possible money is not lost. But I think nowadays people have gone far. The public integrity has gone low. People are now stealing money in the church. They're even stealing money even in those families when they are grieved. So I must tell you, the problem is people are now living very far with the truth and God. And this makes a problem. They can do anything with the fearing anything. So in my understanding, I think we must make sure we make a set and do more research. As ACFIM is doing some research, we can collaborate even with us here in Tanzania to do some key questions around research to make sure we get better reasons as to why people are not interested with the public issues and public processes. They are interested with their daily survivals so that they make life, and they're not interested in public events and processes. Why we must interrogate. But the few that I've mentioned, I think they can add to the beginning of our talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Israel, for those candid insights. I will now turn to Felix and Felix, in your own experience as an anti-corruption activist, but also scholar on political finance, but also scholar on social issues of social accountability and citizenship and citizen agency. Bring us up to speed with your own view and perspective on what explains why citizens, the ones we are saying must be, should be our point of resort, do not seem to be very interested in matters of how their politics is funded, how their political parties are funded, and yet they always turn out and vote for these, but also they are interested in other things. What explains this? Tell us your own view and your own perspective from where you stand and sit.
Thank you so much, Henry, and my fellow panelists. I like the way Karamagi started, set us off. Indeed, it's quite provoking because often I've reflected on the question of citizenship versus an occupant, because ideally, if you're a citizen, you have rights. So and reflecting because and I like what the provocation Karamagi puts to the fore, because it raises three things that I would want to build on before I can make my submission. The truth is, I think, as a country and as a continent, we've also had what I would call historical distortions. Partly, Andrew talked about it, the fact that the states, at the point of forging states, Uganda as a nation, it being forged, there was no consensus. And that continues even on how we relate with the politics and also how we behave as occupants in a state called Uganda. And that also touches the element of the politics of identity, because I don't know about other countries, but it could be possible, because in Uganda, the identity politics is very common in Kenya, but also when you cross back here in Uganda, you realize that we do not have politics that is organized around national interests. It's more around issues that, and they are selfish in nature. They either speak to our culture, speak to our norms, speak to our beliefs. And that also in the way is related to the fact that as a people, we do not have that one thing unifying us, especially as Ugandans. And also, again, that partly Andrew touched or talked about it. But also the problem of the absence of the state. And I want to emphasize this one because this is very critical. In most of these sub-Saharan states, we have a state that is absent and present. It is absent where it matters most. When you are talking about social services, when you're talking about the welfare of the citizens, the state is absent. But if you want to know that the state is present, when you start to question within the ambits of your responsibility as a citizen. Now, when you start to cross to the border of being a citizen with rights and responsibilities, and you start to ask the tough questions of accountability, transparency, then the state is very present to thwart any efforts for you to exercise your rights, your responsibilities as a citizen. So the state apparatus prefers you to continue to operate and occupy a geographical location as an occupant, not necessarily as a citizen. And in this, you also see what we call the intentional acts of most of the sitting regimes in trying to weaken citizen organizing, where you see pockets of citizens coming together, citizens trying to organize. You then see the sitting regimes, these authoritarian regimes, now reminding you that we are, in fact, in charge, we are available as a state, and then they start to close that space, which has predominantly come to be called the closing civic space, through which the concept of citizenship now begins to get lost, because they will not allow you to exercise and behave and act like a citizen, because that is dangerous to their survival. So there are those intentional actions that also frustrate any form of trying to be a citizen, especially if you are starting to be to hold leaders accountable, to participate in political processes, well knowing and with that form of being empowered to participate meaningfully in those processes, then you'll be frustrated by those state apparatus. But that said, why do we have then citizens whose interest in how political parties, candidates finance their campaigns, source for their campaign money, how they spend it? There are many factors, and part of them are even touched them. The issue is true. The issue of the citizen awareness lacking, we cannot discount it because the truth is that until now, this conversation is still elitist. It's still within those that are considered to be elites. So it becomes very difficult for citizens in courts to engage in conversations and exercise their rights and responsibilities in political processes, holding political parties accountable, holding political leaders accountable, asking the hard questions when they do not necessarily have the information, they don't know, they are not that empowered. It's difficult for them to engage and exercise in those processes. And that is one of the reasons as to why it becomes very difficult for them to ask those very hard questions. But also, whereas at one point, I never used to believe in the argument of poverty as one of the drivers of the way the electorate behave and exercise their rights in an electoral process, I think from the experience now as a long-term observer in electoral processes, it's also clear that poverty in a way creates a vulnerable electorate that does not necessarily give them the luxury of exercising their choices very well and exercising their thoughts into making decisions in important processes like elections very well, to the extent of even asking the hard questions of how their political leaders are raising resources, where the money that they are getting from candidates is coming from. So that also in a way makes most people who are vulnerable because they are poor not to be alive and interested in holding these conversations and in trying to keep the leaders on their tenterhooks to account for where their money is coming from, on who is financing them, not even the source of their resources. So that a poor voter can't ask for the source of their money. That incentive is not there, mainly because of the vulnerability to that extent. Tying in the element of the absence of the state, but present, state being absent in the sense of welfare. This creates a lacuna or a challenge of where you do not have proper service deliveries. And usually where service delivery is not necessarily present or available, politicians then come in to fill the gap, not because they care so much about the electorate, but because that is political capital. So when you see politicians filling the void or taking up the responsibility, a functional state would have done to provide social services, the electorate then, to them, they look at this as, okay, this leader is, in actual sense, responding to our needs, and in fact, they redefine the role and responsibility of a leader. They start to define a leader from what the leader can provide, from the solutions, short-term, long-term, social, economic benefits a leader can provide to the electorate. And because the state is absent, it's only that politician who will come and provide services that are missing, that the leaders will be, that the electorate will be more geared towards to, nevertheless, or not even in the least, more interested to find out where the money is coming from to provide ambulances, to put up health centers, to put up community centers, to provide border borders. They will not be interested in asking those questions. After all, the most immediate needs are being met. So that is also a driver. But also the aspect around the apathy to politics from the citizenry, because of the fact that electoral politics has not necessarily delivered the dividends. And there's been this conversation whether democracy is actually, there is return on investment to democracy, especially person to holder. And irrespective of the arguments being raised, the truth is that in the global South, you would find that elections have mainly remained a ritual, not necessarily bringing through or providing best alternatives to leadership, not solving the long-term short-term and immediate needs of the electorate. And when you have elections that do not address the needs of the electorate in terms of having better leaders, having better policies, welfare being improved, then the citizenry also redefine how they engage in the process, and also redefine their expectations from the process. There are always issues around the trust between the electorate and the leaders. So they don't trust the process, they don't trust the system, and they look at then the electoral process more of as just one of those Santa Claus moments, opportunities. Yes, the season has come, let's pick whatever we can get from the electorate and from the politicians. After all, they will only come back after 5 years when they want our votes. So it's that's how they treat the season, and that's how they treat such an important electoral process or political process. And because they do not attach so much value to it, so they don't expect them to also ask the hard questions concerning source of campaign money, or nevertheless how the money is spent. So that apathy is a driver to the behavior, because they don't trust the process. But also lastly, the aspect around what I would call the flawed concept of political parties in Africa. I think and partly Karamagi touched it, is that I think we need to go back and rethink what works for us. Kenya seems to have understood that coalitions work in their context. I think political parties in Uganda have failed to deliver. You have one dominant political party that is fused with the state, and with all its challenges. Also, you have these opposition political parties. Most of these political parties are built around strong individuals, one-man vision, one-man army. All the others who subscribe to these political parties, they are there because they want to pursue personal gains. I can tell you for sure that there are many people who subscribe to NRM because they want to pursue their political ambition and career. They don't even know, some of them don't even know to the full extent the ideology. So the people who start these political parties have to sell the vision. You don't seem to see a sense of belonging to even a political party. My good friend from Botswana talked about how they don't even contribute. It's everywhere. They don't contribute to political parties. Even supporters don't finance political parties. So if you cannot finance, you cannot support, what would you expect? You simply can't ask for accountability. You cannot ask the hard questions. So they just belong, and until now, the concept of political party is still flawed, but also is still not yet ingrained in our culture, and partly touches the historical aspects on how political party movements began, and to this end, and how they continue to exist and function. I think for me, those are my quick thoughts on that can explain why we are where at the moment. Back to you, Henry.
Thank you very much, Felix. I have to go back to Andrew Karamagi now. And the reason I come to you, Andrew, is that on this panel, we want to find solutions on how then do we get these citizens interested. The truth of the matter is that they are actually interested in the political parties because they actually support them. If you saw what we had in South Africa recently when EFFF was celebrating 10 years of existence, these members, though you saw the funds, they were there. It is also not because some of these concepts are alien, because there's been scholarly, scholarship to the effect that perhaps it is because the whole notion of democracy and political parties is alien. But we have seen them supporting and identifying with other alien things, such as the Premier League and other leagues and so on. So it's not about being alien. It is also not about being disinterested, because they actually support these political parties. And they're very interested in how the leaders conduct and manage those political parties. They're also very interested in kind of the philosophy and the messages of those political parties, which is why they choose to follow some and not others. So the issue is not that they're not interested, but why is it that when it comes to money, they are not? But most specifically for you, Andrew, how do we get out of here? Because the question we are trying to grapple with is how do we then generate interest in this citizen of Africa? Over to you, Andrew. Your thoughts. Is it that you are muted, Andrew, or power has gone? All right, as Andrew joins, let me go to Setso. Yeah, you had the question. The thing is that, yes, they don't contribute to these political parties. Yes, they don't, but how come they support them? How come they support other alien things? And what in your view should we do? Because we are here to find answers. What can we do to get this African to understand that as much as you support those political parties, you vote for them, all right? You need to pick in how those political parties are funded, because this is where corruption begins. This is where the captivity and the capture of political parties and the state starts from. What is your thoughts?
You know, there is an important role that political education plays in citizens' understanding of political participation. So without that primary understanding or that primary education, it's just like financial literacy. You know, most of us, we go to universities, you know, even in the Ivy League schools in our countries, and then we suck at personal finance because it is a skill that one needs, and when cultivated when whilst young, it benefits you even very well when you are an adult. So the same thing with political education or civic education, we take it for granted. And the political parties usually are supposed to be the democratic institutions pushing for political education or civic education. But we're seeing that because they also understand the power of an informed citizen, the power of a citizen who knows from young how a political party must behave and how a political leader ought to behave and how they ought to run government, the power in that knowledge. I believe they are doing it intentionally to keep people illiterate, politically illiterate. So the only way, because at the moment, political parties are the only mechanisms we can use for people to politically participate. People, of course, can vote without being members of a political party, particularly most of the public servants and public service in most of our countries. Most are not active members of political parties, but they do vote. But because parties are the companies that we use and that we have got to push, I think the only way citizens could be interested in participating through political parties might be making political parties attractive again. One, parties doing political education. And if parties are failing, civil society to step in and do real political education, and for development partners to support that political education, because now we know government will not support that kind of political education. I mean, I used to work for Botswana Center for Public Integrity, and they push the most creative, innovative ways of doing civic education because there's no money. The public good that the organization is trying to achieve, government is not supporting, because for them, it is not important to have citizens that have some political education. And one asks why? As the most peaceful country in the world, wouldn't you want to maintain your peace? Wouldn't you want to maintain your good governance by having the heaviest and the biggest oversight machinery in the country being citizens? Wouldn't you want that? But no, that is not a priority in Botswana at the moment, and it may never be a priority in Botswana. And it's not in most countries. And when it comes to countries like South Africa, where You see people contributing money in political parties for big events and big congresses. And I think maybe it goes back to what Andrew said earlier. Why do we contribute for funerals and tithes and offerings? And someone actually did say that, you know, with tithes and offerings, people sit down and actually account how much was contributed and then how much is going to the church coffers, right? Whilst with political parties, sometimes we do not know. But going back to just taking the EFF example, most of their councillors actually have to, I think they contribute about 30% of their salaries to the party, I think. One has to confirm. But there's also a role that business plays in facilitating and enabling political parties. Because you never really know who's going to be in power, most companies would support political parties and give them money, just in case they're in power. Of course, the ruling party gets the money because they always have the red carpet, you know, just laid out for them, and they don't even have to account for the money. And citizens are seeing some of these things. And so those things are not attractive. So the attraction would come in educating people knowing that they should actually join parties and pay their membership and then hold their leaders accountable and then institute the change that they want to see in those political parties. Right now, citizens are actually getting the political parties they deserve because they are not active in those political parties. But also, we cannot solely blame them because political parties aren't that attractive. The leadership in those parties are full of cronyist tendencies and nepotistic tendencies and corrupt tendencies. And some people just want to stay away, especially those who say they belong to the body of Christ, and some that belong to the Islam faith, and some that are in the Baha'i, because you know, faith and politics should not mix. But when it comes to voting, our leadership they go around campaigning in churches and in synagogues and in mosques. And those people vote, even though they're not active in parties. So there's a lot of mindset change, Botswana thing now, that has got to go in, as particularly when it comes to civic education and political education. And just citizens understanding that an access to information is a right they must fight for, because that access gives them the power that they think they don't have, but that is the power that they have. And political parties, you know, also cultivating that culture of access to information in terms of the books of accounts of who gives money to the parties and how that money is used is the power that that most citizens actually are playing with, or maybe they don't even know that they do have, or they do, or they don't think it's worth it. It's worth getting in trouble for, because there's also that in most countries. Some people pay heavily for being nosy, as some would regard them, because they want to know exactly how parties or companies, political companies are being run. So I think until parties show diversity of voices, until parties show that they can deal with conflicts of interest and manage them well, until parties can stop also demonizing funding from outside of the parties themselves and outside of their membership, which is from different groups, and figuring out how to get the money and account for it and use it for good, particularly political education, civic education, until parties can show that no specific groups and wealthy interests actually are trumping public interest. Until we do those things, citizens are going to stay far away from political parties, or at least they will use some of these things as excuses for staying away from politics. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Setso. I don't know whether Andrew Karamagi, you have come back. You let me know if you are there, but if you're not there, I shall now go to, yes, Andrew.
Yes, Henry, I'm here.
I had asked you a question earlier, and the question was, we are trying to find now ways and mechanisms of making sure that we are able to propose ways how we can generate the interest of citizens into the political parties, because the question we asked was, it's not that they are not interested in political parties. They actually are interested in political parties because they support them and vote for them. They are interested in the candidates because they vote for them. And sometimes they even vote out those they don't want. So the interest to that extent is there. It's when it comes to asking the questions of where the money is coming from that they have a problem. And I had also alluded to the fact that there has been scholarship to the effect that maybe the reason that interest is not there is because the entire notion of elections and democracy are alien. But on the other hand, we have seen them pick interest in other alien stuff, such as the football of the Premier League and other European leagues. They support these and these are alien. So what explains why they pick interest in some things and not the others? And what exactly should we propose for the folks out there to do? But also in line with this, Andrew, I want you to merge this with the analysis on why then don't we also see civil society organizations, call them NGOs, that are also existent in the countries and are keenly interested in how political parties and the candidates finance their campaigns. Because even the organizations are not there. There is a flurry of organizations working on democracy, working on human rights, working on other aspects of democracy. There's a flurry of organizations working on women's rights, children's rights, working on many other things. But why is it then that when it comes to the subject of financing political parties and election campaigns, again, the interest is not there? What explains this? Over to you, Andrew.
Sure, thank you. So regarding political parties, I would suggest that the way in which political parties come into being be something that is interrogated. What are the reasons for this political party being formed, emerging? What is its structure of administration or management? Political parties should graduate from being vehicles for the ambitions or interests of the few, or in some cases individuals who create these entities, but they should arise from the fabric, from the people of the society in which they exist. Think about this. Can you imagine anyone launching the ANC, the African National Congress, in mid-90s Asia, just when the Asian tigers were taking off? There would be no connection whatsoever. But we all know the often told story that the ANC arose out of efforts to push back against apartheid. If you look at the Christian Democratic Union in Germany, CDU, they have specific origins that make that party what it is and hold the values that it does. So the first for me is that the parties themselves should arise from the social goals, the lived realities, the challenges, the aspirations of the people, of the constituencies that they purport to or intend to represent. It follows that the question on civil society organizations it's relevant and timely in the sense that what we call civil society organizations are very unfortunately, we've conflated the word civil society or just civil society organizations with NGOs, so that both are interchangeable and used to mean the same thing. Now, if you have civil society which exists because there is a call for proposals, if your civil society is one that came into being because there has been a catastrophe, an earthquake or a war or some other event that leads people to create entities supposedly to fight for feed, rescue, assist those populations to recover. That kind of civil society is the kind that will shy away from political party organizing, movement building, and political party or election finance monitoring or support and whatever else would like to refer to it as. And that even those which exist that are created to respond to issues like elections might actually be entities that are simply responding to what a donor has required them to work on without actually dealing with the very issues that are inherent in political party contestation or politics as a society in general. So it comes, for both questions, it comes down to, I hope if anyone is interested, please, these words are important. It comes down to rootedness, connectedness to the population, having an authentic constituency. Yeah, that's when citizens will then respond to you in the way that we hope that they respond, whether you are dealing with a political party or a civil society organization. Let me end with just a very brief reflection on the kinds of political parties that existed on this continent pre-independence and the few years immediately after independence. So think of SWAPO in Namibia. Think of the one I've already mentioned, ANC in South Africa. Think of ZANU-PF, or then before these splinters happened, ZAPU, KANU in Tanzania, KANU in Kenya, Uganda People's Congress in Uganda. Those entities brought teachers together, students, doctors, farmers, you know, people who were a defined constituency. Today, we do not know, I mean, sorry to say, but many political parties are mere vehicles for illicit business interests, ethnic interests. Many political parties are ethnic surveys or are created out of being an ethnic census and so on. These are not the kinds of parties that we need if we will gather citizens and hope for them to participate in the way that we do. We must connect with their lived realities, interests, and aspirations. Thank you.
Yeah, just to get back to you, Andrew, what
Yes.
then also the disinterest of the academia? Because in Africa, again, the subject of money in politics is one of the most under-researched. So what explains now the disinterest of the academia?
There's a debate I encountered in a book I was reading a while ago. The book is by an Israeli professor called Yuval Noah Harari. And he engages in a debate on the question of whether money follows ideas or whether ideas follow money. The reason why I'm referencing that professor is Professor Hariri tries to show why academia has not picked interest in certain things today because there is no money being directed in that direction. Whereas there was no funder, well, at least as far as we are aware, for Isaac Newton or all these theorists, Faraday, Pythagorean, all these people who discovered interesting ideas of the life sciences, Marie Curie. These people were not funded to discover the concepts that they discovered or to come up with the ideas that they came up with, Albert Einstein and so on. They began by being interested in a certain area of study because that was their passion. In Mahmoud Mamdani's instructive book titled Scholars in the Marketplace, The Dilemmas of Neoliberal Reform at Makerere University, 2005, Professor Mamdani shows that we have the university or the ivory tower or debate has left the university and gone to the conference room. So that if something is not lucrative or paying, if a certain subject is not paying or lucrative or is virgin and not well explored, there will be little interest within what we call the academia. Because as the title of that second book suggests, we have become scholars in the marketplace and are looking for the highest bidder to pay us to research on what it is they want us to research or write about. So that if I write on climate change today, tomorrow I might as well write about SRHR. Next week, I'll be in position to write about zoology. Next month, I will write on tourism. And at the end of the year, I'll be writing a thesis paper on economics. So academia has also suffered the same fate as many of our structures in our African society, to an extent that questions like campaign finance have been ignored. But also to end by agreeing with my co-panelists, who very articulately mentioned, all of them without exception, Felix, Puseto, and Israel, all without exception talked about how it is built, seemingly built into our culture, in our African cultures, to look at money that you are receiving from someone, whether it's in an election or through a transaction, as a gift that should be accepted, or something that you cannot turn away. So with that kind of cultural programming, how do we expect people to be interested in campaign finance in the way that an institution like ACFIM is and has shown over the years? Thank you.
Indeed, that point on cultural programming is more interesting. Let me come to you, Felix, before I go to Israel. But now, Felix, yeah, Uganda, your country, is one of the countries where political parties benefit from public funding. And therefore, since these are public funds coming from the national budget, you would imagine that the citizens are interested in how it is being utilized. Bring us up to speed with how the citizens relate with that money that government appropriates as subsidies to political parties.
A very interesting question, because you see, they are indeed public funds, but I can tell you for sure that even those political parties that receive these public funds, they benefit so much from the citizen disinterest in wanting to know how this money is spent. The biggest challenge with the current citizenry is that it has disengaged from certain political processes. There is that apathy that keeps running through. And the fact that there is also a tendency of citizens to treat taxpayers, public resources as free money. You see, I don't know how it is in other countries, but it's only in Uganda, unless we can use an example of the PDM money. For example, the PDM resources and all these other government poverty alleviation programs that have been piloted and people are mobilized to benefit. There is a sense within which Ugandans believe that government money is free money. It's free money to be eaten. It's that money that government is, the little you can get from government. It's like, if you can get that from government and eat it and use it, it's okay. And that mentality extends into even the way public resources are managed and how citizens interact in the space of playing their role to hold the different government agencies accountable, including following up their taxes. But also the fact that the leaders that we have, and which also partly touches the cultural element, human beings would not want to be accountable. The concept of accountability to work, it must be a bit of forcing it onto us. Where opportunities arises, we do not want to be accountable. And we have that culture of not wanting to account and not wanting to be accountable. Remember, the leaders you get do not come from heaven. They come from the same crop of the population. So they are not necessarily very comfortable being accountable, and neither do the electorate, because they do not appreciate accountability. They do not necessarily carry the same values and zeal to make leaders accountable. Now, the understanding of public resources, or the understanding of taxpayers' money from the public, especially in Uganda, is that, okay, that is money that is for government. They tend to disassociate themselves a bit that this is taxpayers' money, and they look at it as that is public money, money coming from the government, and so it is government's responsibility, and they forget they are part of government, to follow up that money. And that lack of interest tends to help most of these political parties to enjoy using that money without necessarily having another eye holding them accountable to account for public resources. But also, when you look at most of the political parties we have here in Uganda, many of them have been created out of, they are created around individuals who have personal visions, who must sell those personal visions. Some of them even, they are created to be able to tap into resources. I can tell you for sure that there are many political parties that are not interested in taking power. They participate, but as long as they have some bit of numeric advantage, then they can benefit from taxpayers' money. So they are more or less vehicles of access to economic welfare. They do not necessarily carry their ambitions to be a political party that is a party in the waiting, that is a party that provides alternatives, that is a party that wants to take power, but they are comfortable to be political parties participating in a space for purposes of accessing resources or opportunities or economic advantages. Some of them are even in the waiting to be bought. So you don't have political parties that are really, really what he talked about. They are not rooted, they are not connected, and they do not have an authentic consistency. No wonder they are up for sale. So when you have such political parties, the same parties that participate, access public resources with the end in mind of benefiting from the public resources to share and eat, and also be available to be bought by the highest bidder. It is very difficult to have a relationship of an accountable political party, but also it's very difficult to have a situation where also the electorate, because they know why these parties have been formed, why they exist. They know that all this ends up in eating. They're just saying that, yeah, that is for eating. They also know, because they know that the end game is in eating, they do not have to really ask so much or ask them to account. After all, they know that that party is in place so that it can eat the money, eat public resources as a result of public funding that it receives from the government. I think for me, those are my quick thoughts that I can share on the issue.
Thank you very much, Felix. Israel, and I'm going to open this up to the plenary, but now let me first hear from Israel in terms of the context of Tanzania, in terms of how do we then, what would you propose can be done to make sure that the citizen, the ordinary man in Tanzania, the ordinary woman, the youth who is your constituency in Tanzania, are able to pick interest in how Chama cha Mapinduzi, as a party that has been in office and probably is even fused with the state, is managing state funds, who funds it, how do they utilize the money, how do we get the Tanzanian ordinary person interested in these political parties, not only Chama Cha Mapinduzi, but also the opposition political parties?
Yeah, thank you very much, Henry. And as I speak, I'm very happy. When I was looking at the participant, I saw one participant from far as Cote d'Ivoire, Madame Edwige from Cote d'Ivoire. So I'm very happy. I hope she will get time to greet us. One of the things that I will propose, Henry, is that we need to promote the culture of dialogue, engagement, and debates, which I think it has fallen apart in many ways. Few debates at a university level, almost non-existent in secondary schools, and even the children at the primary schools, we don't know what are they taught to be as competent as we could expect. So I think there must be, and this relies with what it was being proposed by my colleagues. We need to do something to propose little amendment in terms of the curriculum and how we bring up the young people to become adults and responsible citizens, and to understand why they should be part of the public affairs in opposition to what is happening. What I also suggested here is that adult education is also very important, and it should be meaningfully understood. What is adult education? Some people think adult education is about teaching people how to read and write, but I think it's beyond that. People should be engaged to discuss meaningful things at their adulthood, even if they are employed, non-employed, or they are farmers or people who do anything in community. They need to get classes, could be 2 hours or could be an hour, just to be able to articulate issues related to public affairs. So if the adult education is not promoted, you get people looking for breads and get to sleep. They don't know why they should associate. So the main people go to the bar, to the groceries to take alcohols and go back home. But I think if they get an alternative way to discuss important issues, it should be education that can bring change, even if somebody is not in a formal class. But the other thing that I think we should do is to make sure we review political systems and electoral systems that are making almost politics to be monopolized by political parties. And when they are monopolized by political parties, people don't speak, because if you speak against the party's stand, you are chased away, not only as a member of the political party, people are removed even in the parliament. When you lose your constituents as a member of a political party, and you are already a member of parliament in Tanzania, you lose everything. So you are disciplined to say, and that goes even down to the normal citizens. You know that when you speak like this, you must be careful what you speak, because you may be free to speak, but you're not sure what will happen after you have spoken. So I think we need to make sure we make political systems be as open, as inclusive, and that people should be able to. So that demands civil society and citizens to demand for legal reforms, policy reforms, that brings a political system that guarantees participation, inclusion, and activeness of the citizen. But also, I think one very interesting thing that I will propose is to make sure we do away with monetized civic education and voter education. We have here in Kibaha, Coast region, where we do our works here as YPC, and also Henry knows the Ushiriki Tanzania. We also make sure people get as much as possible the civic education, but in a cheaper way. We bring here every month people across this part of the country. They come for 3 hours from 3 p.m. lately up to at least 6 in the evening. They get one topic discussed. What we offer here is just drinks, the venue, and maybe if somebody appears to support, some few bites. And people don't fight for transport allowances, but they come on their own, they learn something, they get back. And we are expecting to form some committees to push policy reforms based on the debate that have been happening here in a way that is very costful and possible. But people think of civic and voter education, they look at the call for proposal, like what my Karamagi said. If you will talk of that, you will not get money, and that you will end up not giving what citizen would be able to get, because when the proposals do not win, it means you are not working. So we must make sure that we have diversification. Related to that is to promote the African local philanthropy, so that we have givers, supporters, providers of resources, not only money, could be conference rooms, could be whatever, but it should be people from within Tanzania, from within Uganda, Botswana, and any other African country, and not waiting for, we call it here Muzungu, the Europeans or the Americans to fund you so that you can educate yourself on how to run public affairs. I think we must make sure we engage the private sector, we engage the middle class to be happy to support issues related to improvement of local participation. And finally, civil society. I think we need also, because civil society organizations have been silenced in many ways. Many countries, the NGO laws. In many countries, the laws related to media services, laws related to terrorism, laws related to whatever you may mention, they are all as if are meant to restrict movements, to restrict free discussions, to restrict freedom of association and expression. And if that happens, then you will not have active CSOs. So what we need to do is to continue pushing for reforms that we make sure the civic space we are fighting for comes back. In Tanzania, we have President Samia Suluhu Hassan has expressed possibility for reforms. And if we do not use this chance now to make sure we push some necessary reforms, we will get back to days where we were almost blaming each other, where we were at that state of shrinking, not only shrinking, it was almost closing civic space. So if you're in that situation, you fear to ask question, you may release a statement, and you have to find places where you can hide yourself. But so let us fight for necessary reforms. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Israel. I'm now opening it up to the participants. If you put up your hand, I should be able to invite you to make your comment, submission, question, if that be the case. So please, if you put up your hands, I will be able to see who you are. Augustine, do you want to tell us, share with us part of the context in Liberia or Dakarai? What's happening in where you stand in Zambia? It would be good to hear your own experiences on this platform.
Well, thank you for provoking me, Henry. Can you hear me?
Yes, you are loud and clear.
Actually, I'm from Zimbabwe, not Zambia.
Yes, Zimbabwe, sorry.
Yeah. Yes, yes. Well, I think it's more of comments. I think all the papers presented were quite detailed and thought-provoking. I guess my own input into the discussions is that the lack of citizen participation in public processes lies at the heart of this debate of apathy in campaign finance. Just as a recap, I think we all know in 1990, the meeting that was convened in Arusha on popular participation, generally recognizing the lack of participation in the development process of citizens in Africa. I think the conveners could have just been speaking about this topic of political finance. It's just mirrors that realization in 1990 that generally speaking, citizens in Africa are not meaningfully involved in governing the continent. So if I look at my own country, ruling elites are always quoted warning citizens and their organized formations from participating in politics. It's been turned into a very dirty word. And this is perverse because citizens are participating in politics by voting and paying taxes and levies and other things. So governments actually induce this apartheid with this attitude to the citizens that, once you vote, I really do not want to know what you think. And this lies at the heart of this so-called apartheid in knowing what's happening with campaign finance. And I think another speaker has already spoken about the conflation of the party and state. I believe this blurs the line between public resources and funds, which ought to be legitimately used by parties for campaigning. So that smokescreen makes people also not be really interested or not know the implications of usage of public resources for campaigning. And the previous speaker also talked about legislation that circumscribes the activities of CSOs. If organized civil society cannot move freely or congregate freely in a country, then again that creates a distance of citizens from the topic. And we know all too well in Zimbabwe, because we've got a bill that was threatening to shut down the activities of civil society. And yet civil society are very active at grassroots level in making people know the mechanics of governance. So that's another, I think, interesting or very important thing to recognize. So all I'm saying is that the lack of interest in political finance is just a continuing sub-theme in the lack of meaningful citizen participation, particularly in economic governance, because party finance is best understood in the national budget. So we may all want to reflect in our own countries to what extent do citizens participate in the national debate and also playing an oversight role or tracking what's happening with the budget, because some of the resources again for campaign finance come from the fiscus. Debates on public finance issues, such as debt, they are proceeding at a very technocratic level, leaving people out. So we must not be surprised with their lack of interest. But in terms of the way forward, I think one thing we can do around the continent is to promote investigative journalism, because I think journalists have got a key role in surfacing the things which are hidden from the public view. They will assist citizens, I think, to connect the dots regarding party finance. But I think I would not add much more to what has been said. I think all the speakers have made very good contributions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rai, for those submissions. And I think I can see that there is not much contribution from the rest of the participants. And when I check the time, I can see that we have slightly under 15 minutes. So I am going to ask each of the panelists, and I know we have lost already Setso. She had to rush to another engagement, so she left us, but she had notified us earlier that she will not be able to stay the course. Yeah, but let me give each panelist about 2-3 minutes, generally to share your final thoughts on how do we now go forward, because we understand that democracy in Africa needs the active involvement and participation of citizens, and that citizens have to play their role, because we have for the longest time left matters, political finance to the political class. And we are saying that they have not lived up to our expectations. So I'm giving each of you 2-3 minutes to give your final thoughts, and then we call it a panel. Thank you. We start with the Andrew Karamagi.
Yes, sure. Thank you. So for me, it's a mixed bag. I'm happy about the progress that we've made in certain areas, but I'm also disturbed by the thought of what I see happening on the continent, and how the things that we talk about in the politics, how far removed they are from the dignity issues of the day. I want to end with a story of a friend who was writing her doctoral thesis, a doctorate in law, and just for her own curiosity and to give her research paper, Breadth, she interviewed unlikely people who she sought permission from her supervisor who permitted her to do so. So one of the unlikely, what we call key informants in the interviews, one of the people that she looked for, one of the people she interviewed was her mother. Her mother is about 84 or so years old, something she had not heard about before, rule of law. And the mother says, "You're asking me about this thing, but explain it to me. What do you mean exactly? What are you talking about when you say rule of law?" So my friend explains using textbook terms. You see the independence of the press, the judiciary, and all these difficult concepts to an 84-year-old woman. The woman listens and says, "Explain it again." And she explains again. And so the lady says, "My daughter, why have you given me all this headache? You should simply have told me that you're talking about good manners. Everything you've explained to me sounds like good manners at the end of the day." And all of us on the call can agree with that dear old lady, that the rule of law at its most basic form is the ideal of, just being a well-mannered, well-behaved. So I am, as a young African, an African who's considered a youth, I look forward to living in a continent where relatable interests, things we can touch and feel, not things that are up there, out there, too far and beyond us. Only then can we pay attention to questions of campaign finance, monitoring, and participation in these processes. Because if we can't feel it in the way that we feel other social, cultural issues we love to engage in, then it will remain an abstract concept out there that is discussed on YouTube and Zoom and in high-powered conferences without being meaningful to the people that we live with. I'll end with a question to all of us. How many people in your house, where you live at home, whether you're in Harare, whether you're in Dar es Salaam or Johannesburg or wherever, how many people in your house could have sat through the discussion we have had for the past 2 hours and make sense of it and be interested in the things you've said? Or are they simply saying, daddy is in those things that he likes to engage in, those things of his, those discussions of his that we don't understand? How many people in your house can relate to what has been discussed here today and find it useful? Thank you very much.
Wow, what a question. So it goes to all of us. Let me go to Israel. Your final thoughts on the subject.
I'm here. Thank you. Thank you very much, Henry. The last question, I think my wife and two of my staff told me they were following on the YouTube. So it sounds good that some of them were interested. So I was
wonderful news.
Yeah. And secondly, I think I would just want to say, I want to congratulate ACFIM and Henry for actually setting up this such a very important and unique topic in civil society movement, but also in politics, touching monitoring money in politics is such a challenging and difficult. I know, Henry, when you came here in Tanzania, we wanted to do it, and we were worrying that it was an electoral year. Maybe we were going to interfere a lot of things, and we left it. But I think we have to renew our effort to make sure we make the public interested, but also we are also, as civil society, interested to see how money in politics, not only during campaigns, but also how political parties are being financed. But also, I think I need to join, as I said, we can do some more research on important questions. And I'm sure, Karamagi, the question you posed today, you can be one of those people who can join ACFIM and ourselves to, I think, to do a more expanded research in this question, which is not much researched. And let us attract some resources from people who like this, so that we do more to get more evidence to push the agenda. We need to have political hygiene, as said by Professor Professor Lumumba, and we need to have people win with integrity. And I think we need free and fair elections. But if we don't touch the question of money, we'll remain with the dirty politics and unreliable politics. Finally, I think, as we said, we must make sure we avoid money or we use less money to push for adult learners to get civic and voter education so that we have the best out of what we can. And this is going to be a very important opportunity. I want to wish all of you the best of luck in the week, but also I'm quite ready next time you want to engage Tanzania, we will mobilize and we can participate in the processes. Welcome also to Tanzania. Thank you.
Thank you, Israel. Karibu, karibu. Felix, let's hear your final thoughts on this subject.
Thank you so much for this conversation. When I joined this area of money in politics, I looked around, I asked myself a golden question that that one thing that if it was addressed would improve the nature of our politics in terms of addressing violence, in terms of addressing exclusion, in terms of addressing quality of leadership, in terms of addressing advancing of ideas. And I just, the question was, what is that one thing that if it is addressed, it's like a ripple effect, will immensely improve the quality of our electoral politics. And money is that one stain that if it gets into a white fabric, it is so visible and makes the white fabric so stained and so dirty. To that end, this conversation, whereas it is a conversation that many have regarded as an elitist conversation, it is very relevant and timely. I can tell you that the current wave of coups, when you double click, many of them, there is the influence of money in the electoral outcomes to the extent of where we are at the moment. So that makes this conversation very relevant and timely. And as my closing remark and final remark on that is that I think we need to consistently, intentionally have this conversation, but also break it down to the point that even a common person can understand and relate with what we are saying, to the extent that that mother will be able to relate and say, yes, that is good manners, just as Andrew said. And ultimately, if we can have a continental initiative, voices that are promoting political finance transparency, we can do so much in improving the quality of our democracy and also defending democracy that seems to be on a decline and under attack at the moment. Thank you so much, and those are my final thoughts.
Yeah, of course, I cannot agree with you more, because if you look at the two parts of the subject, money in politics, the first one, money, is very clear. And when you mention money, you say money, everybody will turn their head. So the thing is now the one in politics. And I think if we can able to bridge that gap in connecting money to politics, we should be able to really mobilize and get the citizens interested. I have here in the chat room Dakarai saying that he's trying to answer the question Andrew Kalamaji asked earlier of how many people are interested in the topic. And he's saying that his daughter is trying to drag him to the dinner table. And of course, he said yes to Continental Initiative. And of course, thank you for it. So we've come to the end of this international virtual conference on money and politics in Africa, and the theme campaign finance transparency. A key outcome of this meeting has been the agreement. I think every participant has been unequivocal to the need to have a continental coalition that engages on issues of money and politics every day, something we can call a political finance transparency initiative that we continue interacting regularly. if you cannot do that quarterly, maybe 2 times yearly, so that we can build this coalition and keep interacting and sharing and use this as a community of practice, so that we that which the political class cannot do, we actually we take lead. If the political class cannot provide oversight, we can provide oversight. We can bridge many of these gaps. And so we will be sharing the report. The recordings are on YouTube. We'll share the report, including the key highlights. We have a publication called The Secrets Known. It comes out, I think, every Friday morning. So we will have to highlight some of these in tomorrow's edition, but also share with you the report of this event. On behalf of the Board of Directors and Management of Alliance for Finance Monitoring, but also on behalf of the African Election Observers Network, which is the other entity that I will host here. I take the honor now, the singular honor of saying goodbye to you folks, and goodbye and thank you to everyone that have sacrificed the time. That means a lot. It is an a statement of commitment to work towards the achieving Africa's democratic renewal. It's a struggle that must continue. A luta continua. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Goodbye. Good afternoon for now. Thank you.